Thursday is football Christmas as we kick off the 2025 NFL season, which also means we now have important fantasy lineup decisions to make. In this video, we will be going position by position, analyzing the top 24 players at each position for week one, home run starts and stinky fades, the best daily fantasy plays, and notable injuries around the league. This is my first entry in a season-long series where you can consume week-winning content in the span of lunch. So let's dive right in with the quarterback position. On the left side of your screen, you're going to see my top 24 quarterbacks for this week. We're not going to spend time going through each quarterback. This video will be far too long if I do that. Instead, I'm just going to touch on some guys who I think are notable based on them being high in my rankings or low in my rankings, or just facts that need to be put out there for you to win your week. So real quick, the first two quarterbacks in these rankings are Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And us NFL fans are going to be hit with a treat week one, Sunday night, when Baltimore does go to Buffalo to face off. This game does have the highest total set in Vegas at an over-under of 50.5 points. So Vegas does expect these teams to put up points, which is great for fantasy. Both these quarterbacks lead potent offenses and bring elite rushing upside to the table. So these two definitely deserve to be at the top of this week's rankings. And then looking down a little bit, at number 11, I do have Trevor Lawrence. This is likely higher than maybe everyone has in their rankings. But T-Law does open up the season at home against what was the worst ranked total defense in the league last season in Carolina. We can expect growing pains out of this young Panthers offense, which has a lot of new faces, including a lot of rookies. And this is especially true when they're faced with a Liam Cohen offense, which plans on utilizing a lot of pre-snap motion and trickery, like we've seen in preseason and training camp. When you pair that with BTJ, Travis Hunter, an interesting running back room, that could lead to fantasy success for T-Law season long. But I definitely think that is the case in week one against what is, again, a weaker Carolina Panthers defense. And then looking down even more on this list, we look at Joe Flacco at 21. Joe Flacco is going to be going up against what was a bottom 10 defense from a season ago in Cincinnati, in a game where they're most likely going to find themselves down early against what was one of the best scoring offenses in the NFL led by Joe Burrow. So Flacco is likely going to have to throw the ball a lot at home. And honestly, Flacco has proven to be a pretty solid veteran in recent years where he makes the right plays, gets the ball to the right people. And I think Joe Flacco is a solid quarterback to target in week one, or even a streaming target in really deep leagues. And now we'll move on to my starts and fades for the week. So other than probably start of the week, I'm going to avoid throwing in no-brainer starters in this segment because that does feel like cheating. And that's not really going to help you make tough lineup decisions. But we're going to start of the week, and that's Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense are going to have to carry this team again all season, and I'm all over that in week one with their matchup against a bottom 3 team in the league in Cleveland, where Burrow has all his weapons healthy to start the year with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, Mike Gesicki, you name it, and I'm all over Joe Burrow again in week one. And then I kind of touched on T-Law already, but 2 starts I have are in the Carolina-Jacksonville game. So Bryce Young is also going to be going up against what is one of the worst pass defenses in the league. Jacksonville was actually the worst ranked pass defense in the league last season. The Jags did bring in some new faces in the secondary, one of those guys being Travis Hunter. But Travis Hunter alone in his first NFL game isn't going to overnight fix this secondary that I still think is very suspect. So look for Bryce to carry the momentum from the end of last season, where he did finish as the QB1 in week 18 of fantasy and find some success here in week one. Another start I have is Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams' first game in this Ben Johnson offense can't come against many worse cornerback rooms. The Vikings corners are very weak on paper, and this is a really good spot for Caleb to get it going in week one at home on primetime. Following Caleb Williams, we got Kyler Murray. I really like Kyler Murray to have a top 10 finish at the quarterback position this week against a New Orleans team that might be the worst in the league and a team that we can expect turnovers from young quarterbacks. And then again, already touched on Joe Flacco, but he is my sleeper at the quarterback position for this week. Still a veteran quarterback that can make plays. And like I said, there's some streaming upside here as your quarterback too. Now, on to my fades. My fade of the week is Justin Fields against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Justin Fields' total pass yards and touchdowns are set so low in Vegas for this week compared to almost every starting quarterback every starting quarterback. And his rushing upside is seriously capped against what was the sixth best run defense in the league last year. And they know exactly what to expect out of Justin Fields, who was their former quarterback. So I'm not considering Fields to be inserted in lineups till we see this Jets team finding success, if this offense does find success this year. Another sit I have is Cam Ward. Simply put, I would not look to start a rookie quarterback on an unestablished offense in Denver. Playing in Denver is a very hard place to play on the road, and that's especially true for a rookie's first game in the NFL. And then lastly, my last sit at the quarterback position is Drake May against the Raiders. I am wary of starting Drake May until we know that guys in that receiving room are going to emerge on this offense and help him out. I don't think the ceiling is very high for May as of right now. And until we really see some of those receivers like Kyle Williams, Stephon Diggs, Demario Douglas, even Shefton Chisholm, some of those guys really step up and make a difference. Now, moving on to daily fantasy plays, my favorite plays this week are Jaden Daniels against the Giants. I mean, if you're going to pay up for a quarterback, it's got to be Jaden Daniels or Joe Burrow, in my opinion. They're right there, just $100 off. Both these guys are worthy of it. I think they both have great matchups, and the floor for both these players is around quarterback 4, with their ceiling being legitimate quarterback 1. Another player that's also worthy of paying up for this week is Baker Mayfield. This should be a shootout type of game, in my opinion, in this NFC South showdown. He could finish as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy this week. If you still have any doubts on Baker Mayfield was a top 5 quarterback in fantasy last season. And then again, Bryce Young and Trevor Lawrence. If you're going to go for more value plays where you still have that top 10, top 12 kind of upside at the quarterback position, Bryce Young and Trevor Lawrence are great options. And I don't expect a lot of teams to roster Bryce, so that could give you an advantage. And then injuries to note. So Matt Stafford, he has been practicing recently. He is expected to play week 1. He's probably going to play week 1. Just something to keep an eye on. I don't think it's going to be much of a problem this week, but it definitely is something to monitor for the rest of the season. And we know Deshaun Watson and AR are injured and out, so Flacco and Daniel Jones are the week 1 starters for those teams. All right, so let's move on to the running back position. Same thing here, top 24 running backs on the left side of your screen. So at number 5, we got Chase Brown. The points I made with Burrow against the Browns are going to apply to all the Bengals players this week on offense. Chase Brown also has the advantage of potentially seeing an increased number of touches if the Bengals take an early lead in this game and look to run the rock more than passing it. So that's that. And guys, Christian McCaffrey's at 3. Take advantage of McCaffrey while he's healthy. We know he's healthy in week 1. So, I mean, especially for daily fantasy sports and like underdog type of drafts, make sure you take advantage of Christian McCaffrey while he's healthy and on the field. Going down to number 10, and around the 10, like 7, 8, 10 range, there's 3 guys I expect to be heavily leaned on this week, and those guys are Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, and Kyren Williams. Josh Jacobs is the only viable running back in Green Bay with the injuries to that room. Marshawn Lloyd, his backup, is out for at least 4 weeks. So look for Josh Jacobs to get a lot of opportunities, which we know he's more than capable of carrying. And Jonathan Taylor and Kyren should also see a lot of opportunities as well against what are mediocre defenses this week and a lot of question marks surrounding their quarterbacks, with Daniel Jones' first start as an Indianapolis Colt and Stafford's back injury. And then going all the way to the bottom of this list, we got Jaylen Warren at 24. This may seem a little high, but Jaylen Warren is being viewed as the lead back in Pittsburgh to enter the season. And the proof is in the pudding with just the 2-year extension he got this previous weekend. He brings fantasy upside through both the pass and the run game, and the fantasy community can reap those benefits until Caleb Johnson is ready to take over. Jaylen Warren's total on yards, passing and receiving this week is surprisingly high at 74.5 or something like that. So he should be a viable fantasy option this week. Start of the week for me is Chase Brown. Already touched on Chase Brown, all the reasons why. So moving on. A start I have this week is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones faces what was the 5th worst run defense from a season ago, with essentially a rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy leading the offense. I expect the Vikings and McCarthy to lean heavily on Aaron Jones, who is a veteran, against, again, an exploitable run defense. Another running back I'll be looking to start this week as a running back 2 or flex is Tyron Tracy. Tyron Tracy is the most dynamic running back on the Giants. And in the game where the G-men are going to need to put up points, I expect Tyrone Tracy to receive a lot of looks in both the run and the pass game, where he combined for 1,000+ yards last season as a rookie. Next up, another starter I have is J.K. Dobbins against Tennessee. Everything is pointing to Dobbins being the RB1 in Denver, at least to start the year. I think RJ Harvey will be the lead back by mid-ish season, but I think Dobbins is a smart start this week at home beyond what is a top 5 offensive line, facing one of the weaker teams in the league. The Broncos likely will run the ball a lot in this game, where they should be dictating the script, so look for J.K. Dobbins to find some success this week. Some sleepers I have are Austin Eckler against the Giants. JCM has a lot of hype behind him right now, but he's currently listed as the RB4 on the initial depth chart. No doubt, a lot of this is him getting the rookie treatment here, but I still think the Commanders are going to trust their veteran back in week 1 over younger options like Chris Rodriguez and JCM. He also carries high PPR upside, and he's not a bad play in deep leagues or DFS in week 1. So after that, we got Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. The Panthers' front 7 is very questionable. They were the worst run defense in the league last season. One of the worst run defenses in the history of the NFL. I expect one of these running backs to have an 80 to 100 yard type game this week, and I would lean Tank Bigsby here. And then finally, Jordan Mason is my last sleeper. He's on here for all the same points I made for Aaron Jones. And this really leans on if the Vikings heavily involve him, as he is the younger back who was traded for a reason. And then going to my fades, my fade of the week is Breece Hall against the Steelers. Like Justin Fields, Breece will be facing a very tough Steelers run defense. And if you have him, you're likely going to start him because he's most likely your RB2. I pray he's not your RB1, because if you've been watching my content this summer, you know that's not the move. I'm just not a big believer in the Jets offense at all for fantasy this season, and Breece Hall is going to start the year for me as the fade of the week. Sit RJ Harvey. Again, nothing against Harvey, but Harvey is just not the guy yet in Denver. He still looks like a raw rookie from what we saw in preseason. I would not expect him to go off in week 1. Another player I'm sitting this week is Nick Chubb against the Rams. Nick Chubb seems like a popular sneaky play this week, but I'd avoid him considering he'll be facing a stout Rams defense. Running down what was one of the worst O-lines in the league last season. I expect the Texans to pass the ball more than running it this week. And then another sit is Caleb Johnson. I was very high on Caleb Johnson this offseason. I'm still very high on Caleb Johnson, but I'm not comfortable starting him till he is viewed as a Steelers lead back, especially what is against a solid Jets defense in New York. And then I'm sitting both Browns running backs, not starting Jerome Ford or Dylan Sampson in a game where I expect them to be chasing the Bengals. Not a lot of upside here. And then two guys to be cautious of are Travion Henderson and JCM. There's very high upside in both these guys for this season, but week 1, I'm honestly sitting back and seeing what happens. I know a lot of you, including myself in some drafts, did draft Trey to be like our RB2s, but I'm not confident we can reap those benefits in the first week or two of the season, but I promise you his time will come. And moving on to DFS plays, my favorite plays this week, I touched on all these players on the list, and their values are all there to match those facts. But one player I did not provide commentary on is Chuba Hubbard. Chuba finds himself as the RB1 behind a top 10 offensive line in the NFL. I expect him to be a top 16 running back this week with top 10 upside if the Panthers offense is legit in week 1. The value is great where it is at with him. And then just value of the week real quick, Tank Bigsby at 4,600. I think that's a phenomenal flex player, like an RB3 play if you're playing deeper DFS leagues. Some injuries to note. So Devon Achane is probably the biggest one. He has had a calf issue, but he is on track to play week 1. He returned to practice on Monday. Other running backs on this depth chart are with Madison out for the season, Jalen Wright likely out week 1. That just leaves Ollie Gordon. If for some reason Achane can't play, Ollie Gordon is a decent option to stream or play in DFS leagues. Joe Mixon, we know, foot injury placed on the IR. He's out for at least 4 games. There's growing concern that he might miss the entire season, which would be crazy, but we'll see in 4 weeks. Tajay Spears, starting season on IR, gives Tony Pollard a boost, at least for the first month. Rashad White, He has a groin injury, expected to be ready for week 1. I mean, Bucky Irving is going to dominate that backfield, something to keep an eye on. Najee Harris is expected to play week 1. He had that weird firework incident that injured his eye, but I think this does have an effect on Amari and Hampton. Najee Harris was paid a lot of money to come in this year for LA. I think it's going to be a running back by committee, with Amari and Hampton obviously being viewed as the RB1, but just something to keep an eye on. Just know this I think I'd have Amari and Hampton higher in my rankings for this week if Najee Harris wasn't playing, but this does affect things for me a little bit. And like I said earlier, Marshawn Lloyd on IR, leaving just Josh Jacobs, where he should see the ball a lot. So moving on to the wide receivers, looking at my rankings here, stopping at number 12, Mike Evans. So Tampa is dealing with some big injuries at the wide receiver position right now, with Chris Godwin out for a bit and Jalen McMillan. This opens up the door for Mike Evans to be that legit wide receiver 1 in Tampa, and it even opens up the door for him to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy for at least the first month or so of the season while he's fresh. And that is definitely the case in week 1, in a game where I think we should see a lot of points between Atlanta and Tampa. And Baker is going to be looking for his top target in this season opener. And then going on to number 14 with Teterow and McMillan, I am very confident McMillan's going to have a statement game in his first outing as an NFL wide receiver. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, the Jags secondary is suspect. And if that Bryce to McMillan connection is everything it's supposed to be, this could be a major mismatch in week 1. Also, don't forget, Jalen Coker surprisingly did land on the IR before the season, and Adam Thielen was traded. It's the T-Mac, Leggett, and Renfro show for week 1, and I'm betting my money on T-Mac to outperform the rest of those guys. Number 19, we have Xavier Worthy. Worthy should enjoy fantasy success at least until Rashee Rice is back. So look for that to start in week 1 in Brazil. And then at number 22, we have Jerry Jeudy. I'm not really high on Jerry Jeudy, this finishing as a top 20 wide receiver this season, but I can't deny the upside this week in a game, like I said earlier, where Flacco is going to be looking to throw the ball. And as the Browns' number 1 wide receiver, Jeudy could be in for a solid wide receiver 2 kind of week. And then lastly, Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka has all the hype in the world behind him right now, and he could realize that hype in this week. Again, like I touched on with Mike Evans, there are an ample of injuries. There are an ample of opportunities for Egbuka with key guys out. He's super exciting in week 1 to start the season. So moving on to my starts and fades. My start of the week is Brian Thomas Jr. Again, BTJ might absolutely cook Carolina's secondary this week. J.C. Horn is there to minimize the damage, but the way this defense is schemed, he's not going to be following BTJ the entire game. And when he's not, Carolina is going to be in trouble. A top 5 wide receiver finish this week is definitely in the cards for Brian Thomas Jr. And then a start I have, again, Teterow McMillan. Already touched on him. Start T-Mac if you have him, please. Another start is DJ Moore. I'm very excited to see what DJ Moore can do as Ben Johnson's wide receiver 1 against potentially the worst cornerback room in the league this week. So start him with confidence. Again, both Mike Evans and Mike Egbuka, I think both of them are smash starts this week in what should be a fun game. Couple sleepers I have at the wide receiver position. We'll start with Matthew Golden. A lot of injury concerns with that Packers wide receiver room right now. Jaden Reed questionable for week 1, and other guys like Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson hurt. So that leaves first-round wide receiver. That leaves the Green Bay's first-round wide receiver in over 2 decades to potentially be Jordan Love's top option in week 1. And this is a game where they're going to have to score points against the very strong Detroit Lions offense. So Matthew Golden is a very exciting sleeper in week 1. Same points go for that were made for DJ Moore, go for Rome Odunze here. Rome does need to have a breakout season after being drafted 9th overall. And this is a great spot for him to do it, where he'll be drawing even lower quality competition than DJ Moore. And then Ricky Pearsall is an enticing start in week 1 where he could be the Niners wide receiver 1. I fully expect Kittle and Christian McCaffrey to see the load of the work on this offense in this week 1 matchup. But Pearsall could be right after them, with Juwan Jennings missing a good chunk of training camp and potentially not being in that top-notch shape he needs to be in for week 1. Finally, we have Josh Downs. This Dolphins defense is very suspect, and I think Daniel Jones has the potential to make Downs really relevant for fantasy. So we'll see this week where I think he can be realistically viewed as a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 with upside. Moving on to some of my fades. Fade of the week for me is Travis Hunter against Carolina. I'm not ready to start Travis Hunter in fantasy in week 1. Let's wait and see what his split is between offense and defense. And I'm not confident enough to start inserting him into my fantasy starting lineups if I have him. I think it'll be very experimental with him on offense till they really figure out the right balance of him playing corner and wide receiver. Another sit I have is Garrett Wilson. Again, Justin Fields' passing totals are so low this week, and honestly, so are Garrett Wilson's receiving totals. My fate of the Jets offense just continues throughout the positions. Next up, we got Stephon Diggs against the Raiders. Diggs has been surrounded with question marks this summer stemming from his torn ACL last season, but it does look like he's going to start week 1 with no snap count. I would just not trust Diggs as a starter here in week 1 till he feels closer to 100%. Another sit I have is Amari Cooper. I'm not starting Amari Cooper, who was just signed a week ago because his name is Amari Cooper. He's a wide receiver 3 or 4 listed in this depth chart to start the season, and I would just not expect fireworks out of him in week 1. Another vet I'm not starting is Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen was honestly so inefficient last season and just not himself. If you do have him, just do not start him, please. I'm begging you. Some DFS plays. We got BTJ as one of my favorite plays. Already touched on that. Drake London. If you can't tell by now, I'm very high on the wide receivers in this Falcons and Bucks game. And Drake London does have the highest upside out of all of them in this week 1 showdown. He could very well have a top 5 finish this week. Again, Ted McMillan, great value at 5,200. I think you should take advantage of that in his first game. And the value of the week is Emeka Egbuka at 4,600. And then lastly, both rookies, Matthew Golden and Egbuka both carry that upside at a low price tag. Both of them sub 5,000, and I think they could both very well outperform that price tag this week. Some injuries to note. Again, Jaden Reed does have a fracture in his foot, which he's not getting surgery on. He's going to try to play on, but week 1 he may not play. We'll wait and see. Juwan Jennings back at practice after a confusing summer. Marvin Mims is back at practice with that groin injury. Stephon Diggs again should not be on a snap count in week 1, and then Tyreek Hill was a limited participant in practice this week, but he is expected to play. And then moving on to the tight end position, looking at my list here. At number 4, we have Travis Kelce. So Kelce is going to be high in my rankings to start the season because without Rashee Rice, he's going to be forced into seeing a lot of targets, especially in week 1 where he's fresh. And this Chiefs team does have something to prove after the criticism they did receive since losing the Super Bowl. So I do like him at least here in week 1. Number 9, we got Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft is a tight end I expect to finish as a top 10 to top 12 tight end this season. And like with Matthew Golden, there are a lot of targets up for grabs right now in that Packers offense. And his quarterback already really trusts him and is going to look for him in this game. And then my start of the week for tight ends is Trey McBride against the Saints. I could honestly see Trey McBride having a 2-touchdown game this week after only grabbing 2 touchdowns all of last season. The Cardinals would be fools not to get him more involved at the beginning of the season. And look for that to start in week 1 against the weak Saints and what is a weak defense overall. Guy I'm also looking to start is David Njoku against the Bengals. Njoku gets a major boost in fantasy with Flacco as his quarterback. He's one of the best receiving tight ends in the league, and Joe Flacco should have faith in him to move the ball downfield, especially in a game like this where they'll need to pick up yards and points. Another player I have for as a starter is Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren does feel like a risky start in his first NFL game, but honestly, if you have him, I think you need to start him. Simply to Njoku, he's getting a fantasy boost with Danny Dimes being his quarterback. I think we're going to find out very fast that Warren is one of the Colts' best targets on offense, and that could start week 1 against what is a mid-Dolphins D. Another player I got to start is Hunter Henry against the Raiders. I expect Drake May to lean heavily on their team captain, Hunter Henry, so some of these wide receivers really establish themselves in the pass game. Hunter Henry honestly just feels like a really great streaming tight end or tight end 2 in week 1 against the Raiders. Another start I have is Juwan Johnson against the Cardinals. Like Henry, I expect Spencer Rattler to view Juwan Johnson as a safety blanket on an offense lacking elite wide receivers. Juwan Johnson was awarded a massive contract this offseason, and the Saints are fully planning on getting their money's worth out of that, so he is a sneaky starter in week 1. 2 sleepers I have are Brenton Strange and Elijah Arroyo. I like what both these young tight ends bring to the table as their team's tight end 1s this season. You're only really starting one of these guys, though, if you're in really deep leagues, but if you're in that situation, they both do have decent upside. Fade of the week, Kyle Pitts. I refuse to start Kyle Pitts until he proves he's a legit fantasy starting tight end. Everyone knows the story here. I'm not going to dive deep into it. And like Kyle Pitts, another sit I have is Dalton Kincaid. I refuse to start Kincaid until he proves himself. It's inexcusable that he finishes the PPR tight end 29 in Josh Allen's MVP season on that Bills offense. It's not like he missed 8 games. He missed 5 games. Tight ends that missed 5 games still finish in the top 15 at a thin position. But the good thing for Pitts and Kincaid is that they're in favorable spots in week 1 to really contribute, so we'll see what happens. On 2 other tight ends I am looking to sit this week are both Steelers tight ends. The Steelers tight end situation is really weird with both Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth there. Both guys have the same over-under for receiving yards set for this week. And let's just wait and see what the split looks like between these two before we start putting them in our fantasy lineups. Looking at daily fantasy plays, my favorite play, Trey McBride at 6,200. I feel like that's something I'm going to be looking to hammer this week. George Kittle right under him is actually very good too. He's going to be getting a lot of targets this week, I think, on this Niners offense. David Njoku at 4,700 is also a very solid option. And then the value of the week for me is Tucker Kraft against Detroit. Tucker Kraft at 4,000 I feel like a steal. I would no doubt be inserting him as my tight end if I'm looking for a cheaper option at the position. And the biggest injury to monitor at the tight end position this week is Isaiah Likely being out for a bit. This just gives Mark Andrew a boost as Lamar's favorite target while Isaiah Likely is out. So that's it for my week 1 guide. If you have any questions regarding your fantasy lineups, make sure to drop them in the comments below for me and the rest of the fantasy community to chime in. Good luck this week, and I will catch y'all next week.